Pleasure to have you all here. Today is an exciting day for us. First, I want to thank, by the way of introduction, I'm Chris Hackney. I'm founder and CEO of AI Guardian. We're a software company that does AI governance and compliance for a lot of companies. But I also want to thank King & Spalding for co-sponsoring this today by offering up this honestly incredible venue. This is so much better than most of the ones I do. So please take this in. And then also the AI Governance Society. It's a small group here in Atlanta coming together around these subjects. So overall, thank you to everyone who's been a part of this. Thank you for showing up. Again, this is an exciting day for us. AI is always an exciting topic. And I always like to start off, I'm curious here. Who's excited about AI and where we're headed? Like, raise hands. All right, good, thank you. Who is very excited about AI right now? All right, good. All right. Second side of this question, who's concerned about AI right now? All right. And yeah, it's both. And who is very concerned about AI? All right, that's about right. And I think everyone's actually, it's right to be both excited and concerned. That's what's exciting about it for today, but why we're having regulatory and legal discussions at this stage, at a very nascent stage. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is those themes of excitement and concern, where things are going, why those two feelings are shaping the direction of AI today. So let's jump into it real quick. Just for everyone's awareness, I'm going to start off with a keynote on the core topic. We're going to discuss the regulatory and governance forecast for the year ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been in 2023 on this subject. We've got a great panel discussion coming up after that that will kind of double click into these subjects. I will do deeper intros of everyone from that panel when we do that, but really great insights from both the business side and the legal side in that discussion, which I think is an important balancing point on this topic. We'll leave some time for Q&A. We're hoping this is part of a discussion, so as you have questions, we'll open that up for questions from each of you. And then best part about this is we've got a great room full of people who are really interested in this subject, leaders both in business and legal. So we've got a drinks and mixer environment to do some networking, have some time after the event, okay? All right. So I've got this slide up here on purpose. First, we are at a law firm and they demand adherence to, this is nothing that they're recommending. The second reason I have this up here is because my first slide is kind of a pointed one. And I always like to put this out in front of it, especially in front of lawyers. So my first slide is a basic one, but a really important one. Almost everyone today is breaking at least one law or regulation related to AI. It could be a regulation that's on the books around AI. It could be a regulation in areas like data privacy or security that has jurisprudence over this subject. But too many people, and the reason I start with this is too many people believe this is a tomorrow problem, right? I'm going to get around to this at some point when it, the shit hits the fan. But really what's happening is you're accumulating risk and liability right now. The laws that are on the books, most of the folks who are talking, even when we talk about California, we're going to talk about and kind of their jurisdiction on this subject. Most of them believe that their current laws have some oversight of AI today, and that they should have precedence about how you use AI. We will see more AI-led regulation, but you have to understand that a lot of what you're doing today has something overseeing it, and you're probably breaking the law on it in some way, okay? And we know this because we talk to a lot of our clients on this. And this is one of the kind of checklists we do with our partners and those we work with. And if you can answer yes to all of these, honestly, you'd be the first person who could answer yes to it that we've talked to. The first things most people can say yes to is getting in the arena, right? Questions. Is AI critical to our future? Absolutely. I talk to every C-suite in the world, and the hand goes up. Right? Is it something our senior management is focused on today? Absolutely, usually at a board level and across the C-suite. Are you guys doing something in AI? Absolutely, we're doing something. But then you get into these other questions. Do you know all the things you're doing right now in AI? Do you know all the applications, all the models that your teams are working on? Have you done an AI mapping of that? No. I know we're doing things. I don't know all of them. Do you have a policy to govern what you're doing? At best, you get an answer of, well, we've got a memorandum that our general counsel sent out. It told people not to do these things. But there's no policy around how they should use AI. And they all know that everyone's dabbling in OpenAI and ChatGPT, but there's no policy that dictates how they should use those. It just says, just don't. Have people attested to it? Just like you have HR policies and others, have they signed off on having read it, agreeing to it, both internal employees or third parties? And then you get into the really good ones, which are more around risk. Do you even have an idea of the things you're doing, what the risk profile of those are, what the mitigation plans are? Do you understand, we were talking earlier on NIST, do you understand NIST, AI, RMF, and risk management frameworks? And then, obviously, do you understand how to protect your IP right now? You're generating a lot of materials in code. You might be using GitHub for code development with AI components to it. You might be doing marketing materials, but things like US patent law do not recognize machine-generated innovation. Actually, the US Patent Office just came out last week and clarified and reconfirmed that again. You need to have substantial human contribution to be able to patent or trademark anything you create. And so if you can't answer yes to these things, you're either breaking the law or regulation, typically, or you're creating significant risk liabilities that you don't even know how to manage today. And so that's why these conversations are really important. It's not a tomorrow problem, it's a today problem. It's something that's a today problem because you've already walked into the arena, and hell, you haven't walked, you've run into the arena. And you've got to do a better job of grabbing onto these things and making sure you're adhering to them, okay? So, now I scared the shit out of everyone. Let's talk about 2023 and where we've been. Because I know we've got to, actually I'm curious from this audience, like let's do beginner, mid-level, expert. Who here is more beginner level on AI and regulation? Okay. Mid-level and expert. My panelists don't raise their hands? All right. All right, that's fine. All right, that's fair. See, that's a good hedge answer from a lawyer. All right, so that's about right. So we got a broad group here. So let's just start with this. I've been around tech for about 20 years now. I've lived through a lot of these wave cycles. One of my first was in social media. And I want to take you back in the Wayback Machine to 2009, 2010. It was a glorious time for social media. The age of exuberance. You had politicians who couldn't wait to embrace this newfound medium. Facebook and Twitter were considered the catalyst, the positive catalyst for the Arab Spring and democracy. Without social media, democracy couldn't get out to the world. You had folks like Mark Zuckerberg lauded as heroes of industry. And I particularly like what's on the right side of this. This was actually written by my client at the time, who was the head of social at Intel. She sold a lot of these. It's not selling as well now, but you lauded these heroes right at that time. And we know today, we've lived through all this, and we know where it's going, and it's gone, right? You got Zuckerberg 2 weeks ago standing in front of Congress having to apologize to kids, the parents of kids who have been harmed by social media. Calls for regulation. Social isn't a catalyst for democracy now, it's the biggest threat to democracy. And so you can see these cycles play out in tech, particularly the more successful technology is in not only affecting businesses, which we're all a part of, but affecting society as well. This type of change for society and the pace by which it happens always leads to a lot of issues. And so this year, where are we at? All right, this is how AI started. You've got Sam Altman from OpenAI getting a warm reception in front of Congress, smiling faces. You have congressional leaders and other legislators really happy that there's voluntary guidelines. Wow, that's really great that Google said they maybe do X. And the point being is, we know how this story is going to transform, right? We know where it's going to go, but right now we are in that age of exuberance. I can, trust me, in 5 years, those congressional hearings will not be those type of smiling faces staring back at you, right? So, you kind of know where we're starting, you know where this could end up. There's good reason for the opportunity and the exuberance of AI, though. You're having a faster adoption curve for this than even digital, even mobile, and it's really because there's real value on the back end of AI today, right? This isn't just a hype cycle coming out of the West Coast. or other elite institutions, there's real value here. And when you see McKinsey and Accenture, like really outlining what the economic impact of this is going to be, and their outlines right now say it's going to be bigger for the U.S. economy and the global economy than not only the digital age, but literally the advent of electricity. That's how much they think this is going to change what we do and how we do it. There's really good reason for that. We've got incredible computing power growth, applications through all business. And so when you look at this adoption curve, when we work with our partners, this is what we're typically seeing, and we talk about real value here. On the left is where most of this is. Most of what we're doing today is efficiency plays, right, and utilization. As humans, it's very hard for us to imagine the future. But what we can imagine really quickly is the idea that, hey, what I'm doing today, what if I could just do it faster, quicker, cheaper, right? And that's what we're doing. We're just taking everything we do, making it faster, quicker, cheaper. But what happens is, as you do that, you bring the marginal cost of what you do down to almost zero in these. And this happened at the digital age and the advent of companies like Amazon. And as you bring that marginal cost down to zero, you start to open up true innovation pathways, right? The ability to do things that we always thought were too costly, too cumbersome, or not scalable. We now can do them. And so we're still at a stage in the infancy of this that we haven't seen true disruption coming down the pike. We've seen cooler search. We've seen some videos that look neat, some social media applications, but we have not even seen the true disruption that's coming in this space. And that disruption is going to come. There's not going to be anywhere to hide on it, but let's put it this way. It doesn't matter if you're in sales, you're in marketing, you're a grandmother at home. It doesn't matter. It's going to flow through all of these departments and affect them. And so there's really not going to be anyone, just like I was around 10 years ago and 15 years ago with SaaS, right? And we were all talking about the cloud, and half people didn't understand what the hell the cloud was, and it became a joke. It's the same thing with AI. At the end of the day, it's just going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to transform everything we do. So with that in mind, we are actually seeing this year already a huge surge in regulatory interest. Over 1,000 AI laws and regulations were either passed or proposed globally in 2023. And this isn't, there's epicenters in Europe, the US, and in China. But there really isn't a country that hasn't started to explore this subject yet and start to get a legislative pathway started on it. For all the reasons you are, if you go to any of them, they'd raise their hands the same way. They're excited. They want to foster this in their own countries, but they're scared about it and concerned about it. And so as tech people, we always kind of push off regulation. We say, well, governments are slow. It's going to take a while. I'll figure it out then. Industry experts like Jeremiah, myself, others, this is the fastest we've ever seen it. And we think it's only going to speed up for some of the reasons I'm going to talk around in the 2024 piece of this. Now, with regulation in 2024, the epicenter has been Europe still. The EU really feels like they're the ones who should take a global lead on most of these subjects after GDPR and data privacy regulation, and they're doing the same thing here. For the EU, they've been driving at a really accelerated pace for what is a conglomerate group of countries. It only took them less than 6 months to go from real negotiations into the provisional agreement that was reached in December 8th. They just actually this last week did committee approval by an overwhelming vote of the member state countries. It will go into publication and entry into force next quarter, Q2. That means that enforcement will start to happen on prohibited activities under the EU AI Act by the end of this year. That is a phenomenal pace of regulation for a governing body like that. What that means, though, is their lead is going to become the reason they're usually important is two things. First, they're really good since GDPR on building regulation that is extraterritorial, meaning it doesn't just affect you if you're physically in the EU, it affects you if you do business with the EU. If people who use your systems, even if they're not in the EU, are EU citizens. Like they have figured out how to have a global impact without being a major, truth be told, a major economic power at this point. And they're woven that into the EU AI Act. So it doesn't matter if you're in South America, Asia, the US, you have to start to think about what the enforcement of this looks like today, okay? Now, what we like about the EU AI Act is they've done actually a really smart thing with a risk-based compliance approach. So what that means is they really haven't worried about specific outputs and measuring those for enforcement. What they've really focused on is use cases. Not all AI is as dangerous in its use cases as others. And so what they've done is divide the entire EU AI Act by this risk-based compliance approach. At the top of this is level 1. That's the prohibited stuff that's going to be enforced by the end of the year. And it's the stuff most people are most scared about, right? Facial recognition, social scoring, manipulation, some real hot button items that really no one feels is safe for AI to play in today. Those things start to get prohibited in 6 months after enforcement starts or entry into force happens. Most of the work we're looking at with clients falls into level 2, high risk AI category, right? High risk is things like social components, anything with high risk outcomes, medical, insurance, finance, HR items systems fall into that. Law enforcement, the ability to use biometrics in law enforcement in those areas as well, kind of plays between prohibited and high risk. This is where most of the compliance comes into effect. There's about 12-month period of after entry into force that this happens. So early 2025, enforcement of this will start to happen. But this is where companies need to understand things like conformity assessments, ethics impact assessments. There's a large list of things you're going to have to start to do to prove that not only your models, but your applications of AI are conforming with EU AI Act. Past that, level 3, those are lower risk applications. Not as much compliance there, but the EU organization is looking very closely at best practices and transparency. The idea that, hey, we're not going to by law say you have to do X, but we really are saying you probably should. And these are areas like chatbots and customer service avenues. You're going to see a lot of AI come into the customer service model. Deepfakes, we're all very familiar with those. Video tech is going through the roof on AI. The idea of watermarking and having transparency and sourcing around those subjects is going to be huge. And so they want to see you replicate the things you do for the higher level with this as a best practice. And then lastly, minimally invasive use cases, things like AI and video games, et cetera. Really low risk harm factor there. But do you at least have proper AI governance, codes of conduct around this as an operation? All the things I said at the front you need to say yes to, you should be able to do it even if you're doing that. And so what we really like about this is the risk-based compliance approach. We think it's an orderly approach, and we also think it's one that's going to be replicated by other governments and legislative bodies as they move forward in this subject. Okay. What we don't like about this is it's really, really complex and has a lot of layered compliance framework components to it. This chart is from one of their partners on publishing about the EU AI Act and what you need to do. And this is what they think is the simple version of it. So there's a lot of complexity to it. And so when I say you need to move now, it's because you're going to need to start to work with lawyers, consultants, software companies who really are starting to understand these things as they come out. And there's still a lot of vagary to parts of it. They specifically call things out, like I mentioned earlier, an ethics impact assessment. I dare you guys to go online later and look up a template for an ethics impact assessment. They don't exist. But trust me, Deloitte and others are working on those now as templates. So you'll start to see that come together, but because of this complexity, you have to start working on it now so you have things ready by the time enforcement hits. Okay. Now, the U.S. hasn't been standing still, actually. I think we've been doing fairly well at a federal level with this coming out of the White House. So what you've seen is two primary focuses on our side for this year. The first is the AI Bill of Rights. We've been very focused on, since we've got such a lead in AI, not killing the industry, but having safeguards around the most critical aspects of it. So you've seen aspects around safe and effective systems, algorithmic discrimination. We have a very big focus on bias results, especially in those high-risk areas I talked about, like healthcare and financial decisions. Big issue on data privacy and focus on data privacy in the existing law overseeing this. And then things like notices, human oversight, et cetera. The AI executive order by the Biden White House is about 100 days old at this point. And they came out with a 90-day update a couple weeks ago. And it's basically a mad rush by government agencies to adopt AI governance principles through what they do. And pretty much all the agencies hit their mark for the first 90 days. So yeah, I think you're actually going to see a lot of this fragmented compliance approach come out of the agencies themselves, the FTC, the FDA, et cetera, because they're leading a charge on having to do that themselves in their own organizations. The only surprise that really came out of the Executive Order 90-day notice was the invocation of the Defense Protection Act, the DPA. This is rarely invoked. It's usually for national security issues. But it was determined that AI is such of a big issue that it's going to be invoked because this is a national security issue. So you're going to see some oversight of models under the DPA. That means the big players like OpenAI are going to have to divulge their models to government agencies. And we also saw big guardrails starting to put in place against foreign national access of those systems. Our governments are extremely afraid that our innovation is going to be used against us by foreign actors. And so they're putting really big protections in place against foreign actors accessing them at all. Okay, and that follows on the back of the same chip embargoes that are going on with NVIDIA chips and others. Okay. Now I'll say the one part that's not on the slide that I skip over is Congress is paralyzed. Nothing's happened on the congressional level, and probably isn't. Hell, we have data privacy. We still don't have a federal data privacy law. I think we got 31 states who have invoked it, but none at the federal level. You're going to see the same thing happening on the state level. We have had an active but fragmented state level action plan for 2023 with a surprising amount for this early passing into law. But you're going to see the same thing that's happened before. California leading the charge, New York leading the charge. We were just sitting down a few weeks ago with the governor's office here in Georgia. They want to do an executive order for Georgia combined with the Southeast states. No politician or leader wants to be excluded from this conversation. And so they're going to want to have at least executive orders or some basic legislation passed that they can run against, or at least protect themselves in the next election that they did something. So we think you're still going to see, I'll talk about it in the predictions for 2024, but heavy involvement at the state level in 2023. That's going to continue into the year ahead. All right. So I asked this question up front. This is actual polling data. People are concerned, somewhat and mostly are here by a clear majority. This is US, but when you look at this globally in almost every country, same result. People are also highly in favor of regulation. This is one that's always surprising. This poll's highest for wanting regulation of any subject in the world right now. Every country, every populace has a majority favoring regulation. And so when I talk about the interest of politicians to come into the space, it's not only something they might believe is the right thing to do, but it's the populist thing to do. And those two combined are going to move things quickly. Okay. So let's talk about the forecast for 2024. And we move from the year of AI into the era of AI because it's going to be a multi-year piece of what we do. And this will be the setup for our panelist discussion coming up. So let's start on a happy note. I've got 5 predictions for the year ahead. The happy note is there's real substance here. We're going to see continued acceleration of AI in the year ahead, not only because of the innovation piece I talked about, but for 2 big reasons that are really, if you're in this space, you know really well. If you're not, this is a good tutorial. But the first is multimodal AI systems. We've seen that already with OpenAI moving DALL-E and like audio and video systems into its experience if you're playing with ChatGPT. But the ability to take text, audio, video, PDFs, move those into AI models so they produce a blended result with the cumulative impact of whatever was put in, that's a huge step forward from just text-based LLMs. So you're going to see that moving through a lot of use cases really, really quickly. The second thing that's going to be transformational that hasn't really hit most people yet is the idea of AI agents. AI agents are the ability to either do complete tasks and complex tasks with AI, so multi-steps, but more importantly, to combine AI systems so they work together to do those tasks. So instead of having a chatbot on the front end of a customer service, that chatbot might be able to reach in and talk to an AI system that has documentation at the company or other approval systems in the company, negotiate a settlement there, come back to you as a customer with an answer, negotiate that answer with you to a resolution, and then get it approved all in real time with another AI system. So when we think about the things we've seen today, think about the complexity of those AI systems working together, hell, optimizing themselves together, and the power that's going to have. And so that's where when we talk about enterprise AI efforts, you're going to see a lot of that on the AI agent side as those systems come together. Okay, so that's the good news. All right, bad news. Second prediction is we are absolutely going to have a black swan event or events in this year ahead, the next 12 months. By nature of a black swan event, can't predict it, but we can predict the odds of it going up at this stage. And we feel the odds are extremely high. You have too many people running too fast with scissors in their hands for it not to happen, right? We don't know which one's where area will come from, but there are ripe oceans of play for this to happen, right? We have, by some confluence of, an evil gesture of some sort, we have a record number of Democratic elections this year in the history of the planet, covering more of the populace, including the US. At the exact same time, AI is hitting mainstream. Nothing could go wrong there, right? We have cybersecurity campaigns that are absolutely going to start to hit. If you're not 10xing your cybersecurity budget right now, you're making a mistake. But you have extremely powerful AI tools making it into the hands of a lot of bad actors across the world. And the ability to manipulate through text and email, audio and video is going to go through the roof. Okay. Same point on pervasive deepfakes. Everything you've seen so far is kind of a little traceable. By the way, how many people saw the beta launch of Sora from OpenAI? A few this last couple of weeks? The video from that, yeah, the video is incredible. I encourage the rest of you to look at it. And again, that's only the beta version of it. We're truly reaching a point where you will not be able to believe your eyes. You're going to have to double check everything you see. And when that happens, we're a lot of smart people in the room. We'll get fooled. Imagine your grandparents or someone else who's not technologically savvy and what's going to happen, right? So again, we don't know where it's going to hit, but it's definitely going to hit in one or more places. And so for prediction number 3, we think that's going to be a catalyst for even more acceleration and regulation. I talked about the pace it's already at. We've seen this in social and with data, with the Cambridge Analytica moment as a black swan there, which accelerated areas like GDPR. We think that's only going to put these regulations on steroids and tighten them up, meaning level 3, which is low risk, I said, is non-compliance, but it's best practice following. Means the EU comes back and says that's not best practice following anymore. That's also compliance because we're worried about the risks in that next layer. So we think we're going to see that continue to layer on top. As regulation accelerates, we still think it's going to be European-led, but for the reasons I mentioned, they'll just get harsher. We think there's absolutely for the year ahead going to be a fragmented approach. Companies are going to have to deal with state level, national level, European Union level, kind of region level regulations. Some of them will be at odds with each other. Some will be risk-based frameworks, which we think is going to drive this, but some will be outputs. You'll be dealing with a lot more assessments and certifications. And think of those as check the box exercises, but really important. It's like SOC 2, but like SOC 2000, right? You're gonna have to do 2,000 of these things. And then things like disclosure. Easiest common denominator things for governments to wrap their heads around is the things that affect you as a consumer. Just like consent buttons on data privacy became a thing every website you go to. People are going to demand that they know when they're interacting with AI, and you're going to have to disclose that in a little footnote somewhere in a consent button. So I think you'll start to see those things come to the forefront of these efforts. Fourth one real quick. If you talk to the lawyers in the room here at KNS and other places, the standard thing on the law is it's a gray area right now in AI. You had a lot of lawsuits filed. The law takes a while to catch up. But we think that that's actually going to come to more of a black and white area, particularly in IP this year. You're going to have cases moving through the system, reaching resolutions. And so we think you're going to see some more black and white cases, especially in IP, take hold this year. What that means is that accumulated risk you've been putting together now has a court case with a precedence against it. And then you're going to have to be dealing with lawyers coming after those cases and the downflow of it. Okay. And then last prediction. We do think that enterprises are going to take seriously because of all these issues, the idea that they at least have to bring together a risk management framework for what they're doing in AI so they can have confidence in this subject. The biggest reason being is no matter how, for all the things I said about fragmented regulation, complicated legal situation, et cetera, this is a subject, no matter how onerous that is, you can't walk away from. right? If you want to be successful as a business or as a municipality, et cetera, you're going to have to learn how to use AI and use it effectively. And so we're going to see companies start to get really familiar with risk management frameworks around this, things like NIST, ISO, et cetera, that are taking a lead on this and drive that together. And what we think is going to happen on that subject, real quick, is they're going to start to learn about responsible AI best practices and frameworks and bring those together into the overall framework they're doing, okay? And what I say on this always is responsible AI always sounds complicated when you throw it out there, but these are really simple principles. I'm a licensed pilot. Before I go out, you have to do a checklist. Your Delta pilot has to do a checklist of things that are very basics, but if you do it every time, you significantly lower the odds that the plane has an issue, right? These are the same things for AI, right? You just want to do these every time. You want to make sure that there's fairness involved in your data, right? You're not introducing bias on the input so it comes out on the back end improperly. You want to be inclusive. You want to have experts from across your organization or from the communities who are affected by your AI have oversight of what's going on. You want to make sure that privacy standards and safety standards are absolutely adhered to the same way you do with the rest of your technology. And on the bottom of this, you want to have transparency. You want to be able to look under the hood, know how this is working, not let it get away from you. And then accountability. You want to have systems doing constant checks on what you do with human oversight, which is the gold standard for this in your endeavors. So on that note, how do I wrap up my forecast in this discussion before we go to the panel? I like a little Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We're going to have phenomenal growth in this space. We are going to look like idiots in 2 years as well. Both will happen. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. I can guarantee you I could come back to this room in a few years and we would all agree with this statement. Amazing things are going to come out of AI, and some things we're going to slap ourselves on the forehead and go, what the hell were we doing along the way? But that's why it's exciting. That's why technology has changed our lives in measurable ways, good and bad, but the march of human advancement has been an impressive one. So that's our forecast for the year ahead. There we go. Obviously with AI Guardian, if you're interested in more on this, we've got, if you do the QR code, we've got a blog where we do a lot of this news and updates. You can check us out on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in further governance and compliance, please let us know. We're happy to talk on it. Okay. So with that said, you guys ready to hear from the panel? All right. We've got a great one. You guys want to come up? You guys want to come up? All right. So there's Justin. All right. I will introduce you guys real quick. All right. So a lovely woman who has a little sass to her is Beverly Wright. She's the VP of Data Science and AI at Wavical Data Solutions. She was also previously the Data Science Academic Program Director at the University of Georgia. With previous roles at Georgia Tech, Cox Communications, and SunTrust, amongst others. So you've been in a lot of places on this subject. So good to have you on the panel. Sitting closest to me is Justin Daniels. He's an advisor at Baker Donaldson with a practice focus on cybersecurity, blockchain, and AI governance. He's also co-host of the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast with his lovely wife, Jody. Nice to have you here. We have from King & Spalding, Cassie Burns, right there. She's a senior attorney here with over 10 years of experience in the AI and ML spaces. She's also the founder of eDiscoverist and the Illuminating Data blog. But she is I've talked to her quite a bit as we plan for this. She is a treasure trove of detail in these subjects. And then we've got Deepa Krishnan on the end. She's the VP Worldwide Services Delivery, Vice President of Worldwide Services Delivery for the Technology Expert Labs at IBM, where she has oversight of client implementation solutions across IBM's data and AI automation, security, and sustainability portfolios. So pleasure to have you all here. Like I said, really good mix of folks on the business side and the legal side. So we kind of have a good kind of cross answer on many of the questions. I've got a few questions teed up, but if you have a question along the way, raise your hand. We can take time for those as we go along or at the end. But why don't we get started with a very simple one. I'll start with our legal experts here, Cassie and Justin. So we talked about regulatory environment. I've given kind of our predictions and where we're headed, but What's your outlook on the AI regulatory environment as we head further into the year? Curious your opinions.
I think it will continue to grow. It is very much, as I noted earlier, I did not raise my hand at the expert categorization because anyone who claims to be an expert, in particular in law and regulation, I think maybe undercutting how complicated all of this is right now. The speed by which things are getting floated up as far as laws and regulation is just really intense. The EU AI Act, of course, is getting a lot of attention, as it should, as is the Biden EO. And I think from my perspective, where everyone should really be paying attention, and you hinted at this, Chris, is the oversight of federal agencies. We're already seeing FTC as being very, very active. You may want to check out their blog. They post, I think, nearly weekly on various topics related to AI. EEOC already last year got a settlement when they went after a company for using AI in their HR practices. So there's just going to be, I think, a lot of movement in a lot of different areas. So definitely buckle up.
Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
I think I would come at this from a bit of a different perspective. So as we talk about AI, as Chris alluded to, you also have the proliferation of privacy laws. So as we sit today, how many state privacy laws do we have in the United States? 14. And we have at least 7 or 8 that are being considered. We'll have more. On the cybersecurity end, we have no federal legislation, but what got passed last year by our friends at the Security and Exchange Commission? They passed a very big law with their cyber rules. And so what will be interesting, I think, as you see this year unfold is how is AI going to get considered when a legislature only has so much time on its hands and you have issues around privacy and security. And as we'll talk about on the panel and Chris alluded to, when you think about AI regulation, it really cuts across a variety of different legal disciplines. And I think probably the 3 biggest are privacy, cybersecurity, intellectual property. So you're going to have all of this going on while they're considering different kinds of AI regulation, but you have this other type of regulation for important subsets from a legal perspective concurrently happening.
Mm-hmm. And what do you guys think about, and we talked a lot about the EU AI Act. What are your thoughts and opinions on that? Is that going to be the standard bearer that we look at? Is it going to be different? How are you guys looking at that?
I mean, I think that there's a level of ambiguity in some of the different categories. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the actual enforcement shakes out. I think that we're probably going to get a little bit more direct clarity in some ways. Again, with the EEOC, we know that they've drawn a very firm line in the sand saying bias can happen by AI systems. And if there are groups that are being biased or discriminated against, and you've used AI, we're going to come after that. So I think that a lot of attention is on the EU AI Act, but I just think the federal agencies are really going to be very, very active there. But I do like the risk categorization. I think that's a very logical way to approach it. And, you mentioned AI mapping before. I think from my perspective, it's not even a today problem, it's not a tomorrow problem. It's not even a today problem. It's really a yesterday problem because there's a lot of AI systems that have been in use for a while by companies that are getting scrutinized. So just knowing where all of your AI systems are within your corporate infrastructure, I think is incredibly important. And maybe categorizing it in using those EU AI Act risk categories as a starting mechanism of how you track them can at least get you a little bit further along.
Yeah, that's a good point, Cassie, and it's one I overlooked too. Did anyone here see the lawsuit against Humana and United recently? It came out last week. So they just got sued for a proprietary internal system that rated coverage, care coverage, and denial of coverage. It's an old system that's been in their system forever under ML. But ML is now getting pulled together with AI, and they just got hit with it.
Right. So you have these machine learning systems that are categorizing, ranking things, again, human resources, insurance coverage, loans, getting loan approvals. Those systems that have been in place for a while, they're really starting to get scrutinized in a much more meaningful way. So just being aware of them, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about kind of what you need to do later at the end of this, but to Cassie's point, the AI mapping is so important, even if it's just an old ML or NLP, natural language processing system. It's going to be important to understand that if they're in a high-risk area, like, again, Humana's getting hit because it's denial of coverage. That's absolutely a high-risk area. So going back and looking at those is going to be critical at this stage. So Beverly, on your side, there's a lot of upside in generative AI. We talked about it a lot. You deal with a lot of companies in this space from data science perspective. What's your advice today for companies looking to get the most value, real value out of what they're doing? And we always say real value in the sense of don't do the things that aren't, because that just leads to more risk. So curious where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for the companies that I talk to, it's kind of sad because several of them are saying, I gotta do generative AI right now. I'm like, why? Your data's not even in one place. And they say, I'm getting pressure from my board. And I'm like, okay, are you trying to get value or are you just trying to check a box for your board? And so there's this urgency that's really fake. You know, that you shouldn't feel urgent to get something in generative AI because your board is pressuring you. But that's the reality of the majority of our, some of our clients are coming to us sort of desperate with that plea. But that's not my advice. My advice is to start small and to find something that can add value and that does have some sort of meaning behind it, but really start small. Okay. We have a Waveable GPT. It's not actually an LLM. It just enables somebody to use LLMs in a more logical way, an easy way. So I would say start small, start with something easy, start with something that's going to add value, that you're not just doing it, to check a box because your board is pressuring you.
Yeah.
And to have that conversation with the board.
Yeah. And do you see companies making mistakes in that area right now as they move forward? Are they starting giant? Do they not have a strategy for it?
Everybody wants to boil the stinking ocean, don't they?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to boil the ocean like, oh, I'm going to be a superstar and I'm going to bring this giant thing in. So yeah, it's tough, but when I was I won't say which company, but I was at a company and we had a model risk management group. And I don't know how I got protected from that group, but somehow this is before machine learning, I produced 13 models in 1 year by myself, and none of them went through model risk management.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. It should not have happened, and my models were completely transparent. I was really good at notes and all that, so I could have. I feel like we're a little wild west right now. When it comes to machine learning models and even AI systems, that it's like because it's tough to really contain it. And it's not that I'm not saying there should be someone that's the boss of all things AI. I don't think that's realistic. With data science, you can sort of kind of do that. But when you get into AI and machine learning, and that includes like so many different things, it's a lot tougher to put it in a ball with, you're seeing all these chief AI officers. Have y'all seen the postings? It's kind of unrealistic, isn't it? It's a little scary, but it's like, you can't ball it up like that. So that's another thing to really think about as far as advice is develop the infrastructure, decide, make it deliberate, but decide. Don't just like let it happen organically. Decide how you want to structure around it. Is it going to be like a hybrid thing, a matrix thing? Are the business units going to own it? How's it going to work? Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, it reminds me of when cloud came up, the chief cloud officer. Like, it's like, what's a chief cloud officer? Like, they manage this, and it's like, well, everyone does that. But it's actually, you mentioned on the start small piece. It's funny. It reminds me definitely of the beginning of digital, where everyone ran out, and everyone's like, oh, we have to create a website. And you're like, all right, why? Well, there's Amazon or someone's created a website. We got to have a website. All right, well, what are you going to put on it? Oh, we haven't thought that through yet. So it's the same thing. Like, we got to do something in AI, but God knows what we're doing at this stage. Okay, cool. And then Deepa, on your side, just go a little deeper on that subject. Since you deal on the delivery services side a lot, what do you see as the most prominent technical challenges organizations need to tackle in relation to this? Like, as they really get deeper on it, where do you see the issues starting to crop up?
It's a
great question. And I would say there's no easy answer because every customer is on a different phase of the journey. So I'm going to kind of give you a framework to think about it because what might be applicable to you or your clients might be different, right? So starting kind of with the point that Beverly was making, you got to look at your IT infrastructure. Small companies, big companies, companies that have been around a long time. The one thing there is proliferation and heterogeneity of data. Cloud has showed up, private clouds are out there, the world is still running on mainframes. If I need to repeat myself, the world is still running on mainframes, right?
Yeah.
So there is so much out there that today is very, very disparate. And depending on the size of your organization, lines of businesses have gone in and made decisions about things. They've acquired companies, and all of these things are coming together with a reality that is very, 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 very disparate and ad hoc. So how do you take that and make sense of it? Because guess what? The next key tenet is about proliferation of data. We've already talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a statistic that is mind-boggling. I happened to give a talk yesterday to a class at Georgia Tech, and I used the statistic in that talk. 181 zettabytes of data is forecasted to be created by 2025 on an annualized basis. Zettabyte, that's trillions of gigabytes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do you train AI models if you don't have any sort of control over this data? So if you have heterogeneous systems, you don't understand your data architecture, right? There's all these different things. So I think, just kind of to the point that was made earlier, it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
So don't rush to the finish line.
Yeah.
Start your training, understand your data set, understand where you are on that journey. Maybe you're a smaller company that was started more recently, you have a better grasp of it. It gives you better context to go do this. But when the fundamentals of AI governance are that ability to have that transparency. And in order to have it, you have these building blocks.
So how bad is the structured data problem or clean data problem at all these companies?
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah.
It's massive because no one person knows it all,
Yeah.
right? And look, the flip side of it is also your comparative advantage.
Yeah.
Right? If you can tap into that data, if you can access it, if you can read it and interpret it and drive, there'll be tremendous productivity gains as a result of it and value add to your customers.
Yeah.
So it's a true problem, but there are solutions, right? But the point is, don't start at the finish line, right? If you're going to go run a marathon, it's not about, hey, I'm running the marathon tomorrow, right? It's you got to train. You got to get through all of the phases so that you're ready to go.
That makes sense. And I'm curious in the audience, like how many people here have really good clean data at their companies? Anyone? No? All right, so we should all go out and buy Snowflake stock later today. All right? But it's a really good point. And I'm curious just to follow up on that too, like for both you and Bev, from a cybersecurity perspective, like are you both seeing companies taking that seriously with their data and kind of how they house it or their systems? I mean, how are you seeing the companies up their game in that regard?
I mean, they're trying. I just don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, who's going to build the stronger, bigger, whatever.
Yeah.
And so you constantly have bad actors that are, if you get someone who's really evil and really smart, you're in trouble. And I kind of am starting to see and think that nobody is safe. Like nobody is just completely, there's no chance that's ever going to happen to company A. It can happen pretty much anywhere is what I'm seeing. But
it's always the scanned, IDs or scan check, because I do a lot of incident response work on the legal side, so dealing with it after a breach occurred. And that's when you realize, because you have to analyze the data to determine who should get a notice. And it's never clean and organized. It's always a very heavy lift to be able to get those notices out. And it's always scanned IDs or something like that you wouldn't think of.
Yeah,
well, and when you have conversations especially with us, we're always going to talk about data when it comes to AI. Like my company, they brought me on to do data science and AI, but most of the people I talk to, they want to do data science and AI, and we end up doing data for them.
Yeah.
Because it ends up being, it's so funny that with everything that we've done, and we started off with visualizations, and then we started doing modeling and data science, and now we're doing AI. And it's always coming back to the building blocks, to the data itself and the data architecture.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're, if I were to focus on one place to improve what we're doing, that's probably it.
Makes perfect sense.
I have a question. I predict, one of my predictions is, I think some of these models that we've been using, OpenAI is, the one that's so ubiquitous. That was trained on so much data that's just scraped off the internet. So you have that whole garbage in, garbage out. I definitely see in the future that we're going to want more curated, carefully thought, models that are trained. So we'll look back, in the 2 years, the best of times, worst of times, and we'll go, and that was a really junky GPT. I can't believe what I was able to get done with it. So.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Look, I think at the end of the day, there actually is data. There's research that's now proven that the larger the model, it's not necessarily the better the response, right? So some of this is about fit for purpose. What are you trying to do? What is, you use the word use case, like at the end of the day, every business to get that comparative advantage, what is your objective? What's the problem you're trying to solve, right? And it could be something like internal productivity, right? Let's use that as an example, right? So you say, hey, you know what? I want to figure out a way to reduce the amount of people required to support my customer centers or call centers or whatever, because they're going through an inordinate amount of things trying to figure out the answer to the question. Let that be automated. But if you're doing that on a corpus of data that is your data, that is internal, it's controlled, then you can add some of that governance behind it to say, hey, you know what, it's vetted. I'm confident that if they come out of this, which started with this, but now you've curated it, you know that this is safe and got the content you want, then you feel confident that you can do that customer service based on this data, right? And that's the kind of thing where really, I would say that in conversations with clients, it's not the ticky box exercise, right? It is, how do you add value to your business? How do you add value to your client's business? And depending on what your objective is, let us walk you through that journey.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I joked about Snowflake earlier, but honestly, there's going to be a monster business for the companies who can clean up that data, structure it, get it back in, because every company is going to want to run fast, and someone on the technical side is going to go, but yeah, have you seen what's in our data?
Right.
And we're going to need to go hire someone to fix that.
Yeah,
right?
Please don't build an AI system off of this.
Yeah. I'd say also the funny thing is for folks in the room, I've been in product for a long time, software product for a long time. I will tell you your biggest vulnerabilities are the dumb ones. I can't tell you, I bet you at every company you have, for critical systems like Beverly and Deepa are mentioning, you have ex-employees whose credentials never got shut off somewhere in there. I can guarantee you it's there. I've seen it every place. So it's those things where an ounce of prevention is going to go a long way. It's the boring stuff. It's not the stuff that gets you promoted, but it's the stuff that saves your company 3 years down the line that you're going to have to pay intense attention to. Okay. Perfect. So for everyone here, we talked about AI governance. How should companies approach AI governance as they adopt AI, and kind of what governance efforts are you seeing working or not working at this stage? I'm curious.
So for a lot of the companies that I've been talking to, usually goes like this. To your point, the board wants us to do something. So they anoint the CIO, they try to put together a committee, and they start down the path of some use case. The problem with that, as we've alluded to, is what's your risk profile as an organization for AI? And I think one of the key things is, as we've talked about, is, at least in the United States, we're in this nascent stage of regulation. But one thing I think that's important is the FTC has Section 5, what's an unfair deceptive trade practice? One could say it's whatever the FTC may think it is. But having said that, if you use a framework like the NIST AI risk management framework, which helps you holistically approach artificial intelligence, you then put something in place, you have documented processes and policies. So at least if a regulator comes and they disagree with what you did, you're able to show them, here's the work, the thought, the process that we went through. That looks a whole lot different than saying, we got nothing.
Yeah.
And so the thing I want to kind of emphasize to everyone is, while we go through this period of time where we don't have bright guardrails, it's important to find a framework, create a process, put a team together with a sole point of responsibility so that you can document what you're doing. And in my view, I'm partial to NIST. It's a nonpartisan government organization. The SEC cyber rule, they plagiarize parts of NIST. And I think it's hard for a regulator to say that you made a bad choice using the NIST AI risk management framework. Now, do you need to tailor it to your organization? Of course you do. But that's a place that I would start, because to have nothing and to be ad hoc about it, if you're going to take some risks, which I think businesses will, you're not going to have anything in place when the regulator wants you to show your work.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. I love what you just said. I would add that make it part of your investment budget, right? This is not an extra credit project. We've got to make sure that businesses understand that to do this, whether it's the baby steps of the documentation you refer to, will take investment. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is teams are going to cut corners, right? They still have a business objectives, other KPIs that they're measured against. And if you don't give them the budget to go do this well, you're going to find that cutting of corners happening. And so that's the only other piece I would add there is I really think we need to think of this as it's coming. We all see it. Anybody in the room who took the effort to be here understands that.
Mm-hmm.
So for your respective businesses, how do you encourage either for yourself or for your customers, make a business decision to invest in what it's going to take to do this?
And I would say I'm a big fan of documentation as well, Justin. So as another attorney, that's probably not too surprising, but I think, having those broad policies are great, but I think having bespoke policies for the different AI models or systems that you're using and how it's being used and outlining who should have access, what's the validation process, really kind of communicating those to the everyday person who's going to be using it, because that's really where the points of failure happen is the day-to-day person interacting with it. So having, I think, that process addressed in some way, I think is very important.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And
And I think we're gonna have to think about this differently. Data scientists and machine learning experts work with data scientists and machine learning experts. And oftentimes we don't get out of our own world. But in order for us to maybe do this right, we probably have to go more cross-disciplinary.
Yeah.
We need to bring ethicists in the room. Like, we're not even sure who we need to bring into the room. I mean, and it's probably going to take some kind of outside, whether that's a legal entity that is looking outside, or if it's a school that's research-based. I'm a part of the Emory University Center for Ethics. And I used to be a member a long time ago, and they were talking about, combining, I don't know what I'm talking about here, but combining genes for animals and seeing what happens.
that sounds safe.
I know. And companies would come to them with, some of their problems. And now 100% of the conversation almost is AI.
Yeah.
Most of the people come in to talk about AI. So having those conversations with people that are sort of outside of our zone and making things multidisciplinary and involving outside agencies and organizations, I think is going to be important. But also before you get to, because I know this, we're doing this at an attorney's firm, so I know it's kind of a legal thing, but there's also the ethical side of it before you even get to regulation, before you even get to legal. And I sort of see that in different layers, so like for myself, I was speaking at a tire analytics conference in Charlotte a couple of months ago, and I asked a whole room full of these are big companies, Michelin, Continental, like all the big names, American Tire Distributors. And I said, okay, how many of y'all know of your analytics or data science or AI ethics statement? And only 2 people in the room said they had one. Nobody else had any kind of ethical statement.
Yeah.
And so they could just do whatever they wanted. So I have a CAP at the end of my name on LinkedIn as a certified analytics professional. I personally have sort of sworn to my ethical guidelines as an individual. Hopefully companies are going to start developing ethical standards. Hopefully the layer above that, when you get to industries that are going to start, but we're not, this is before regulation, like just ethics, period. Ethics for ethics' sake and for safety and that sort of thing. So I think having those kind of safeguards before you start getting into the legal stuff is probably a good idea, but nobody's enforcing it.
Yeah, at this point. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question, because Justin brought up the CIO on one side, and the other end of the spectrum is what you brought up, which is interdisciplinary. The question I always have is, who should own AI risk management right now at a company? You got those two ends, or a chief AI officer on one end, but who owns it? That's the biggest problem we have with most of our partners, is who actually owns this at a company or organization.
I mean, it really does belong at the top.
Okay.
For something as critical as this and for as game changing as this,
Yeah.
accountability has to be at the top.
Yeah.
Because the moment it's, think about it, even what we were saying about all the other evolutions in technology that have happened, including social media.
Yeah.
When you look at what we did wrong as society, is we passed that to somebody and gave them a title and said, you go solve that
Yeah.
problem. And when that person failed, oh, get them out. It's fine. They failed. Right? Ultimately, what we have to do differently this time around, now that we've learned, is the reason the boards are asking for it. It is a board level discussion.
Yeah.
It is a C-level discussion. And to your point, it has to be every part of that C-level organization has their piece of the accountability, the
Yeah.
legal piece of the accountability, HR piece of that accountability, the technology team's piece of that accountability, right? And that's, to me, you might need an individual to govern all of that, but I
Yeah.
think ultimately, if we don't start it at the top and hold those leaders accountable, especially in technology companies,
Mhm.
we're asking for round 2 of social media.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And it does tie back to what Justin said a little earlier on NIST. The reason we like NIST too is because it standardizes accountability for everything you do and responsibility. So it brings that into the broader organization. Yeah.
I guess one other thing I would add about NIST is if you look at the core principles, when they talk about what trustworthy and responsible AI are, it's safety, secure, resilient, and other ones. You see those concepts are built into the EU AI regulation and other ones. So when you use a framework like NIST, you're already getting on the road towards being, having a foundation to comply with the different regulations. So I think that's another part, but as to where AI will sit, I look at what goes on with privacy. Every organization, it kind of sits somewhere different. They might have a chief privacy officer, some may not. But one point I guess I wanted to make is, we're in this room today. I've got my jacket on. I'm business Justin, but I'm also dad Justin, father Justin, just regular guy. And so one of the questions I have for the other panelists and just for you is, as a society, have we really dealt with the attention economy that social media and big tech has created? And if we haven't dealt with that, now comes AI, which I'm going to go with Chris's black swan, can weaponize misinformation and malinformation. And so what can we do as a society to start to change the conversation so the next time any of us rent a car, the first thing you think about when they're like, hey, plug into the Apple CarPlay in your rental car, you're like, whoa, wait a second. I'm thinking maybe not, because that hookup to my phone, privacy, all that kind of information, but we're not there yet. How does that conversation change? I'd love to hear from others about that.
Certainly have an opinion, mostly because I have 3 young children. And I said to this one gentleman when we were speaking outside earlier, I just told them, when you go to the internet, you have to start with a place of assuming everyone is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we used to live in a society where as parents, we would say, hey, watch out for strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's a stranger now. And you've got people who are pretending that there's someone you know. So it's worse than a stranger, right? It's a stranger in the, pretending to be grandma, right? It's the wolf pretending to be grandma. And so I think I 100% agree with that question. I think we've got such an obligation to have this dialogue, but to have it at every level. It shouldn't be those of us in suits having this.
Mm-hmm.
It should be me putting on my PTO or foundation hat and sitting in the school and enabling that conversation to happen at young ages, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be having that conversation with our kids in the youth sports organizations, because that matters, right? For all of us, right? It is so much more than our business obligation. It is showing up, it is being open about it, it's being transparent about it, it's being vulnerable, saying you're scared because you don't know the impact that something's gonna have, and being okay to have that discussion. Like, I'm scared about what's going to happen when the next bad actor targets somebody that I care about,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
And
I
I think
mean,
that's a part of this conversation too.
it's tough. I mean, you're looking at, there's generational knowledge that's sort of like a a chain, and that you pass learnings on from generation to generation. You know, you tell your kids like, oh, it's a kitty cat. Oh, they're so cute, but don't touch it. You're like, be careful. You teach kids stuff, and that's what our society, that's the fabric of our society. What if we start letting go and letting like AI make all kinds of, not just business decisions, but personal decisions for us? What if the AI is getting our coffee and teaching our children how to read, and not having, you know, we don't have, like, I'm not sure why you have to push this button. I don't even know anymore. Like, what if we start forgetting? And so it's very tricky, especially when you start thinking about the phishing emails.
Yeah.
You know, it started off as text, and then what if it moves to voice, and then it moves to pictures, and then it moves to videos? And then what if it's a 3D, like you look like a person, but what if you're not a person? You know, and I mean, I know that sounds like
No, it's
futuristic, but if you extend where we are and you just sort of extrapolate out, that's kind of where you end up. And then the humankind ends up sort of breaking that chain of generational transformation and moving things. And it makes you wonder where we're going to be. That's why this regulation is so important, because otherwise I mean, I get paid, I've always gotten paid to forecast things. You know, by nature, I'm a predictive modeler. And if you look at the data and the trends and the way things are and you project it out, we got to do something.
Well, and I think some of the stats that you were showing earlier about the number of people who wanted regulation, it being so high, I'm not really surprised. I think Joan is Awful, that episode of Black Mirror, did an excellent job of really highlighting how close some of this technology is, and that hit it around the same time the SAG strike was happening. So you were seeing that fictional account being lined up with it having real potential impact to people having jobs. And then you're seeing things like tech layoffs happening. And I think like that has started a dialogue with friends of mine who don't know what Dolly is, but there is like more self-awareness now. But it's a major concern. And I think the scalability of generative AI and the ability for it to create so much junky data. You know, we were talking about curated data earlier. Curated data is going to be even more important because the internet's going to be like overwhelmed, I think, with just really poorly, low quality, junky Gen AI created data. And what are we going to do with that?
Well, it's interesting when you if I don't know if any of you guys follow Sam Altman or any of those guys or people deep in the space, but when he talks, people go, "Are you worried about AGI?" which is basically human level intelligence of AI. And he says no. He's actually no. It's the ability of AI to persuade. To the point you're making up there, we've all taught our kids what a stranger looks like, what danger looks like. What if danger doesn't look like danger? Danger looks like someone you trust. And it's persuasive at a level, at scalable level, that most humans couldn't. I can persuade one person, I can persuade you a little. But what if I'm an AI that can persuade millions all at once? And that's what they're real worried about. And that's a much lower bar for AI to attain, is the ability to subtly move into factual territory with a little bit of persuasion technique to where you want to go. And that's where most of the industry is most afraid, is that persuasion of a stranger looking like something familiar. And what can come from that. So we're going to go to questions. I have one more question because I want to end on a little more positive of a note than that, because our society's ruined is probably a bad way to end that. But one last question before we go to the audience. What are you optimistic about with AI? When you think about generative AI and what it can do for us, what do you see as the good piece that you're excited about?
There's definitely some things that scare us, right?
Okay.
For sure. And all of that, though, I think about some of the wicked problems. I'm not using that term. I didn't make that term up. Someone else made that term up. But if you look it up, WICKED, wicked problems, those are things like domestic violence, human trafficking, addiction. I was telling you about the addiction project that TAG is working on right now, using volunteers. I think some of the wicked problems that are seemingly unsolvable, homelessness, poverty, hopefully AI can start to make a dent in coming up with some kind of solution for wicked problems. That's what I'm most excited about.
Okay. Fair.
I agree, and I'll give you an example. I was at a social event a year ago, and a doctor came up to me, and he was thrilled when he kind of learned my background. And he's like, "Oh, I have to tell you about what just happened." He's a radiologist,
Okay.
and he said, "We've just installed this new system, and we're looking at mammogram data. So they're looking at all this data that's come in. This new system has AI capabilities behind it, and what it's able to do is go in and look at imagery across a vast array of demographics, right? That's really, really key here, because there's certain demographics where, due to the nature of genes, how it's always going to require those people to come back in for a second screening. So the moment you go from screening to a screening to a diagnostic, it's no longer covered by insurance, or it's no longer fully covered.
Yeah.
So now you're talking about a population of people who may not be able to go in for that second one or whatever. What he came back, he's like, Deepa, like, we are able to now, using these systems, identify things that a human could never do 4 years ahead of time. Identify even in very dense tissue, put possibility of breast cancer. Think about that, guys. Every one of us has had our lives impacted by one of these horrible diseases. And if this kind of capability can unlock identification of these things earlier, really being able to make a change, that to me is what gives me hope.
Yeah.
It is those kinds of improvements that are going to change our lives to get to your GDP, all the growth that's going to come. It's going to come from the transformations that are going to happen in every part of our lives in a positive way.
That's a great one.
For me, I think it's kind of building on that, but maybe mental health of, the older generations. My parents live with my husband and I know seeing my dad had worked hard all of his life, and now that they don't work anymore, they're retired and they have mobility issues and just, they're not able to get out and go. So I think that there's a whole generation of people maybe in assisted facilities, assisted living facilities, or they're not able to get out as much, and maybe it's not even to the point of dementia, but having, Gen AI, you add in spatial computing onto that, some ability to kind of get people out of their rut and maybe prevent, depression that can sometimes occur in older generations. So I think that, and plus the potential for access to justice in some situations. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Makes sense. Justin, are you excited about anything? You look like you don't have anything.
I was going to say healthcare, but I was going to go down the route of dementia and Alzheimer's. If you have helped people who dealt with that to find things that deal with these things that you just watch family or loved ones break down. And if there's a way with AI to forestall that, reverse it, that's something I think we can all agree would be a great thing. So,
and I agree with the deepest is one of probably mine is you have certain things that require extremely high skill levels. And there's only limited human capacity to do them right now. And the ability to go in and do those scans at a high level and democratize that is going to be amazing. And by the way, also, again, one of the top reasons for death in a hospital is medical error. To have an alert system behind the professional to at least back check them on a regular basis is going to help us immensely, because who knows what happened with that medical professional, even though they're doing God's work that day, right? A bad day, not enough sleep, it's the 18th hour on a shift, and they missed something. And the ability to have these systems in the background at least running, we're not ready for them at the foreground, is going to be some incredible advancements for us, and really probably save a lot of lives along the way.
And there was a story that I heard from a company that's a medical company, and they were initially, I use this example to talk about supervised versus unsupervised machine learning. And so they were initially looking at when people come in, patients, and they sign on a little keypad thingy. For those of y'all with a psychology background, you know that the way people sign has something to do with their personality. If they sign quickly, if they use a lot of loopies, if they, and so they were trying to connect using machine learning models, the signature and the way someone wrote with their personality to think about, do they have a higher propensity to not pay their bill? So it started off as that, but that's a supervised process. You have the guardrails up. You're saying, this is the exact thing I want to find. With unsupervised, it's more like mining. And so they said, okay, what else? This is cool. We found a pattern. What else can we find? Well, they identified dementia, or not dementia, I'm sorry, you're all talking about dementia. Parkinson's. They
Okay.
identified Parkinson's like way before a doctor could ever recognize it.
That's amazing.
But of course, then you have the ethical question of, do you tell the patient? Like, whoops, I wasn't supposed to be really looking for that.
But we found it.
Do you tell the doctor? Do you, what do you do with it? I'm not sure what you do with it. But those kinds of things are already happening now, even by accident.
Makes perfect sense. So on that note, I will turn it over. Questions in the audience, real quick? A couple. Yep. We got 2 microphones. Okay, that we're over prepared.
Cassie, you mentioned an EEOC settlement recently around, I'm assuming HR and talent, things like that. So context there, I actually lead a executive search and human capital advisory boutique, and just validation for what you guys are saying. I've been to several conferences around the world, and you can't get on a stage in talent acquisition or search right now without people wanting to know about AI and using that. But the question is really more around, there's a lot of people showing up at these things, startups, that AI startups slash your talent acquisition budget by 50%, 80%, things like that, by using our new software that bolts onto Workday or any of these other things. And it really helps that. But it sounds like, I don't hear anybody in the audience, talking about having governance in place, having audit capabilities in place for these things. And we have clients ask us like, okay, what, should we consider this stuff? And I've been telling them, I'm like, okay, I would be really careful with that.
Yeah.
What would you say how would you answer that question when you have people asking you about the specific stuff around, liability that you could have in classes with applicants or talent in general?
Well, first, I just want to caveat, I'm not a labor and employment attorney, so it is not my area of expertise, but I would say just be careful. And you can potentially look at the New York City Local Law 144. It's a law that came live in July 2023 in New York City, that if you're using automated employment decision tools, which are often AI tools, to make employment decisions, you have to conduct an AI audit, and it has to be transparent. So what we're seeing is there was a consumer report study done in conjunction with, I think, Cornell University. And in December, they went and looked at about 250 employers who did job postings to see if they had posted anything about having conducted an AI audit. And I think there were only 12 or so of the companies that had conducted it. And you're actually supposed to be transparent and show the results of your AI audit, and they were all favorable. So there were certain assumptions that were being made by the people who did this research. It could be maybe more companies have conducted it, but did it under, the guidance of an attorney, and if they didn't get favorable results, maybe protected it under privilege. I mean, that's what they were maybe saying could have happened. But also there is, whether or not you have an obligation to comply with that law depends on your interpretation of the law. And I think there are 3 different categories that requires you to have the audit be transparent. And they're pretty broad. They're pretty broad in that it has to be your main decision, I think, or it overrides a human decision. So we're not really seeing New York City like take any action against anybody. So we're not really seeing the practical impact of it. But I don't know, Justin, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So actually, my first real exposure to AI is I negotiated a contract for the global deployment of an AI tool to vet resumes before you ever speak to a human. So I'm happy to talk to you about it more when we're done, but a couple highlights of that for you would be the following. 1, we did look at the New York law, and the certification they gave us from a company was a piece of insert colorful metaphor. Another thing that was interesting was in the negotiation, and you have to think about this, resumes are full of what? PI, personal information. And they're like, well, we want to take your resumes so we can learn from them and we'll anonymize them. And I said, well, guys, what if that enterprising threat actor comes along and they're able to reverse that process? What happens then? Silence. I said, yeah, we're going to have a carve out from the limitation of liability with a pretty hefty indemnity, because if they're able to get all of that information on resumes, I've got a big fat data breach. And so what you have to think about, and this client went at it the way I was talking about, like they didn't look at the NIST framework. It was literally a month before it came out. So this was a whole ad hoc approach. They hadn't thought through the metrics. So 2 metrics that I would put you, like what is success look like for that? Well, every AI will hallucinate. We all make mistakes too. So with that tool, what is an acceptable level of misalignment between the person and the spot for the resume? And the biggest risk you're taking in that deal is what? The bias that will trigger the different federal and state discrimination laws. And so you have to factor that into the analysis. The client that I had didn't do any of that because they had a budget that they needed to spend the money by year end, and come hell or high water, they were going to spend the money on that. But I'm happy to talk to you because I did a whole presentation on it. I'll give you the presentation if you'd like it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sorry.
All right, great discussion. So I have a particular interest in healthcare as well. I'm glad you guys mentioned that. What are your thoughts on explainable AI being actually explainable and not just a buzzword that's being thrown about, so we're not concerned about issues like informed consent, bias, and other issues, but particularly in the healthcare arena?
So I'll talk about it from a technology perspective. And what I would say is the guidance we generally give is ask a lot of questions before you acquire any technology. And this is true even if the discussion we just had on the job piece, right? Because ultimately it's as the buyer, right, as a person consuming the technology, you've got to see that, before any laws are out there requiring it to happen, you're that first decision point. Am I going to use this system to go do this in healthcare? Am I going to go use this? And especially given all the laws in healthcare already, it really behooves the buyers to make very informed decisions. So ask those questions, right? How do I know where that data is coming from? How do I know the explainability of it? What is the model trained on? Where is it trained? Who does that? Who's responsible for that? Who has indemnity of this if something does happen, right? Is it me, the user of the system? Is it you because you gave me the system, right? Being able to just put it out there and have a thoughtful discussion is something that at least what I've seen so far is clients very quickly can weed out the people who are making stuff up, right? And this is where it's just I think you've got to be very, very careful about the entrants into the field who don't have the history and the trust for you to go run with. This is not where you want to be cheap. This is where you want to be smart. And smart might take investment, but smart will take you a lot. It's an investment now for your future. So.
Yeah, it's a little concerning, to be honest. So when I was 23, I graduated with my master's in decision sciences and applied statistics. And they put me in charge of the cost of service study at a major utility company and made me testify before the commission and Public Service Commission. And the regulators had no idea about my model. I have to explain it and what I did, but there's no way for them, they could if they wanted to, but they didn't have the talent or the ability to look under the hood. I'm totally transparent with it if they wanted it, but they didn't even ask. And so the 2 things that, I know you want to end on a positive note.
We got time for one more question.
Okay,
so you got another shot.
But 2 things that worry me a little are, that was my first exposure to regulatory environment from utilities. And I was like, well, I could have put anything and they wouldn't have known. And then I worked for a bank and it was a similar, regulators have got to get smarter.
Yeah.
They've got to get smarter. They've got to keep up. And that's one of the challenges. The other thing that worries me a little bit is like, Cassie, you were talking about like, well, there's this law, but then if this, and then, you're directed by your attorney. It's like,
Yeah.
we can't make those kind of gray little wishy-washy junk. We can't have that with AI. We gotta be like on it, y'all. We gotta be on it with this regulation. We can't have it like, oh, no, it can't, the gray areas are gonna be, the risk of having these gray areas and loopholes is intense.
I just wanted to add one thing to answer your question is, as this regulation is still nascent, the contract that you sign and the due diligence and how you allocate risk, like I said in the deal that I did. So coming up with the kind of, you know how you see a service level agreement for uptime with cloud services? Well, from an AI perspective, what are the kinds of covenants, expectations that you want to put in a contract so that you're allocating risk? So at least with the vendor, when you get to that point, you have some pretty bright lines of things that they're going to be responsible for. And if they push back on that, or they can't answer questions to the other points, that's where you really need a good contract, and you need to have people who can look at an AI issue from a privacy, security, intellectual property. It can't be a narrow-minded thought process. You've got to be able to issue spot across multiple disciplines that go into AI.
Perfect. So we do have time for one more. Brian, did you want to?
I'm in healthcare as well. And one of the things that we've seen is that sort of contrary to popular belief, I think that healthcare is probably more interoperable today, data flying all around to a bunch of different players all at the same time. And I've got sort of two questions, and they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. The first is, where's my risk liability end if data originates from my system and it's being used in a third-party system and a model is being trained off of that data? So where's my risk and liability of that particular data if a model is being trained off of that? And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's if they're training a model and making money off of my data, where are my IP rights in terms of that particular model? And I want some of that action too. So they're opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I don't want to touch it, and I don't want them to be able to use it. And at the same time, if they're going to be doing it anyways, then where's my sort of cut in that as well?
I mean, I'll jump into the second question. I think we're starting to see that kind of percolate up where, you know, maybe not in the context of healthcare, but in the context of journalism, where, you know, some of these companies building these models, they're licensing the data off of it because they're trying to avoid potential litigation down the road. I think it comes to what Justin's been saying repeatedly and extremely valid. Look at the terms and conditions. What rights are you giving away? And I think we've never really thought about the data we create and the rights that come with it and the true value of data before. And now people are really starting to pay more attention. And I know, Justin, you it sounds like you dabble in like blockchain and Web3, and that's kind of, you know, some thought around it is who owns the data, where does that go, and how can you possibly get compensated for it?
So I'm going to try to help you with first part of your question. So what you're seeing more like you saw the New York Times do it. They have something on their website that says you're prohibited from coming on our website and using our data to train a large language model. So a couple things you want to think about, and I'm coming legally, but more broadly, is one, in your contracts, putting stuff in there about what you can and can't use about your data. You do that on your website. And now you start to build kind of a moat, or at least legal protection, so that if they do, at a minimum, you have breach of contract action. On the other end, when they're taking your data and your training, I think if you do the things where, hey, if you want our data, like in the deal I was telling you about for the HR stuff, that was just factored in the deal. But, you know, I told the client, we easily could have said, if you want to trade on our data and it's anonymized, that should impact the pricing because we're helping you train the model.
And I'd add one little thing on top of that too, just on data access is absolutely going to be key. We haven't, to the point made, we haven't really thought about that, but there's two layers that we're seeing pop up a ton. The first is the ability to access your data so you can shut that off and monetize it yourself. This is what Bloomberg did early. No one has more financial information than Bloomberg. They're going to create a specific use cases around financial markets and resell that data. And so they're going to start to cut off a lot of people and then monetize off the back of it. The other side I'd say on access too, though, is you mentioned kind of third parties, but I'd also talk to internal access. We have been very lackadaisical about who at a company has access to certain data. And with the rise of cybersecurity threats and others, you're going to see a lot of companies start to clamp down on who has any access whatsoever in the protocols. And I'd encourage each of you to start to look at that now as well. Okay. Oh, go ahead, real quick.
Anita, you just speak softly.
Yeah.
You got big points.
Thank you. That's a manufacturing defect. But it's a statement out of probably ignorance or naivety. Like everything that we're describing about the algorithms and the programs doing, right? Humans do it. All the bad behavior that we talk, it's ultimately the humans who are doing it. And all the regulation and the controls and compliance that we're talking about is for the humans. So it sounds like, are we looking for different and more regulation, or why wouldn't the laws that apply to the humans, at the end of it, the AI asset belongs to the humans, and that's the human who's accountable for it.
Do you mean the autonomous vehicle problem that we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, FSD is the same thing.
I mean, where, the car hits somebody, is it the engineer, is it the manufacturer, is it the driver, even though it's driverless? Like, is that what you're talking about?
In general,
As a principle.
It's
As a
in
principle,
principle,
yeah.
yeah. Like, I mean, at the end of it,
Yeah.
it's,
I think-
I think even when we went online, right, we always said, whatever rules apply offline to the humans apply in the online world, right? So.
Can I give one quick answer on that?
Sure.
Because I think I've got
Like I
one,
said,
but I'll take it, sure. But I think the only difference I would give, because it's true, we're doing something safer, faster. That's what full self-driving is, right? And this is the whole Tesla issue of like humans don't pay attention and make mistakes and kill people. Why do we hold the technology to a higher standard than that? But I'd argue in AI's case, the concern I have in the space is the amplification and scalability of the problem is the difference. Like as a human, I can only create so much damage, unless I'm a really special person who's good at damage. But AI can create really big impacts to affected communities really quickly before maybe even detection. And so that prevention up front is going to be critical to hold people accountable to before it gets into the world and can create that havoc. And so I think that's the bigger difference. Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless.
Yes. This seems like a good question to continue on over drinks because we can go down some paths on that one. No, I appreciate it. So on that note, because I am holding you up from drinks and lovely charcuterie, I want to first thank our panel. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. It really was a good discussion. That's the discussion we want to continue on. So we got another half hour out in the lobby. Again, I want to thank all of you for your time today. Please let us know if we did well. We're going to continue to do more of these events. We'd love to have more people come to them at the next and the next. But this is an important subject. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for the panelists' time. Thank you to King & Spalding and others who have sponsored this.